Bismillah, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Asmi, and in this video, I'm going to continue reviewing the books by Brown, which is Teaching by Principle. And in this video, I'm going to review the next chapter, which is chapter 3. So, in chapter 3, we're going to talk about the present and informed approach. So in the previous video, we have learned and discussed about several approaches or methods, but all of them are from the past. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about two main methods that we had in the present. So the first one, we have an enlightened eclectic approach. So Brown asserts that we don't need a new method. What we need is to get on with the business of identifying our approach to language teaching and of designing effective tasks and techniques that will inform by the approach in the previous one. So he adds that it is necessary that we recognize that the diversity of language learners in multiple worldwide contexts demand an eclectic blend of tasks. It's tailored for a particular group of learners in a particular place and studying for particular purposes in a given amount of time. The second method, we have communicative language teaching, but it is quite difficult to offer a definition of CLT because it is a unified but broadly based, theoretically well-informed set of tenets about the nature of language and of language learning and teaching. So to make it simple, the author offers 6 characteristics, interconnected characteristics as a description of CLT. And the first one is classroom goals are focused on all of the components like grammatical, discourse, functional, sociolinguistic, and strategic of communicative competence. So goals, therefore, must intertwine the organizational aspect of language with the pragmatics. And the second characteristic is language techniques are designed to engage learners in the pragmatic, authentic, functional use of language for meaningful purposes. So organizational language forms are not the central focus, but rather aspects of language that enable the learner to accomplish those purposes. And the third characteristic is fluency and accuracy are seen as complementary principles underlying communicative techniques. So at times, fluency might have to take on more importance than accuracy in order to keep learners meaningfully engaged in language use. And then the fourth characteristic is that students in a communicative class ultimately have to use language productively and receptively in unrehearsed contexts outside of the classroom. So classroom tasks must therefore equip students with the skills necessary for the communication in this context. And the fifth characteristic, we have students are given opportunities to focus on their own learning process through an understanding of their own styles of learning and through the development of appropriate strategies for autonomous learning. And the last characteristics, we have the role. The role of the teacher is that the facilitator and guide, not all of knowing best hour of knowledge. Students are therefore encouraged to construct meaning through genuine linguistic interaction with others. So there are several perspectives concerning this approach, CLT or communicative language teaching. So the first perspective, we have learner-centered instruction. So this term applies to a curricula as well as to specific techniques. It can be contrasted with teacher-centered and has received various recent interpretations. So, learner-centered instruction includes one, techniques um, that focus on or account for student needs, styles, and goals. And then techniques that give some control to the student, like, for example, group work or strategy training. And then curricula that include the consultation and input of students that do not propose objectives in advance. And then techniques that allow for student creativity and innovation. And then techniques that enhance students' sense of competence and self-worth. The second perspective, we have cooperative and collaborative learning. So a curriculum or classroom that is cooperative and therefore not competitively usually involves the above learner centered characteristic that I have mentioned before. So cooperative learning does not merely imply collaboration. You can be sure in a cooperative classroom, the student and teachers work together to pursue goals and objectives, but cooperative learning is more structured, more perspective to teachers about classroom techniques, more directive to students about how to work together in a group. And then we have the third perspective, which is interactive learning. So at the heart of the current series of communicative competence is the essentially interactive nature of communication. The communicative purpose of language compels us to create opportunities for genuine interaction in the classroom. As learners interact with each other through oral and written discourse, their communication ability are enhanced. An interactive course or techniques will provide for such negotiations. So several things that we most likely found in interactive classes are one, doing a significant amount of pair work or group work, and then receiving authentic language inputs in real world context, and then producing language for genuine, meaningful communication, and then performing classroom tasks that prepare the students for actual language use out there in the real world. And then practicing oral communications through the give and take and spontaneity of actual conversation. And the last is writing to and for real audience, not to constituents. And the next perspective, we have a whole language education. So initially, the term came from reading research and was used to emphasize one, the wholeness of language as opposed to fuse that fragmented language into its bits and pieces of phonemes, graphemes, morphemes, and words. And then the interaction and interconnection between oral language, like listening and speaking, and written language, like reading and writing. And the importance in literate society of the written code as a natural and developmental, just as the goal or oral code is. So there are several levels that has been used to describe uh, this whole uh, this whole language education. And the first one is cooperative language, and then we have participatory learning, we have student-centered learning, and then focus on a community of learners, and then focus on the social nature of language, and then use of authentic or natural language, and then we have meaning-centered language, and then we have holistic assessment techniques in testing, And the last one is integration of the four skills like reading, speaking, listening, and writing. So there are two interconnected concepts are brought together in whole language education. And the first one is the wholeness of language implies that language is not the sum of its many discretable and discrete parts. And the second interconnected concept is that whole language is a perspective anchored in a vision of equitable, democratic, diverse society. And so because we use language to construct meaning and to construct reality, teaching a language enables learners to understand a system of social practices that both constrain and liberate. And then we have content-based instruction. This is the fifth perspective. So content-based instruction or CBI. So according to Brinton, Snow, and Wesky, CBI is the integrations of content learning with language teaching aims. More specifically, it refers to the concurrent study of language and subject matter with the form and sequence of language presentation dictated by content material. And the last perspective, we have a task-based instruction. So Peter II described task as an activity in which one, meaning is primary, second, there is a more communicative problem to solve, third, there is some sort of relationship to comparable real-world activities. And the fourth is task completion has some priority. And the fifth is the assessment of the task is in terms of outcome. So task-based instructions is not a new method. Rather, it puts a task at the center of one methodological focus. It views the learning process as a set of communicative tasks that are directly linked to the curricula goals that they serve, the purposes of which extend beyond the practice of language for its own sake. So task-based instructions is a perspective within a CLT uh, uh, framework that forces you to carefully consider all the techniques that you use in a classroom in terms of a number of important pedagogical purposes. And those purposes is one, do they ultimately point learners beyond the forms of language alone to the real world context? And the second question that we have is, do they specifically contribute to communicative goals? And the third is we have, are there elements carefully designed and not simply haphazardly or idiosyncratically thrown together? And are their objectives well specified so that you can at some later point accurately determine the success of one technique over another? And the last is, do they engage learners in some form of genuine problem-solving activity? So I think that's all from me. So we have learned about two main approaches or methods that we have in the present. I hope it's clear what I'm saying. If there is some problem or errors or mistake that I might have said, I would like to say I'm sorry. And that's all I think. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.